My girlfriend's grandparents kept calling me by her ex-boyfriend's name, and when I finally asked why, she slapped me. 23M, met Sophia, 22F, during our final year of undergraduate studies. We were both in a crowded seminar on European political history, and she tapped me on the shoulder to borrow a pen. Her smile was immediate and warm, and we ended up grabbing coffee after class. Our relationship developed quickly and felt incredibly solid for first year. We shared a passion for indie films, hiking, and had similar plans for the future. I truly believed I had found my person. The only consistent point of tension was her close friendship with a guy named Daniel, 24M. They had been friends since childhood, growing up in the same small coastal town. Their histories were intertwined. Family vacations, school plays, all the milestones. I understood that bond, and initially had no issue with it. Daniel was a constant presence, a third wheel on many of our video calls when Sophia visited home, and his name came up in stories almost daily. My discomfort began gradually. Daniel had a habit of making subtly dismissive comments about me, which Sophia would relay as if they were jokes. Daniel said your taste in music is painfully mainstream. She'd laugh. Or, he thinks your football team is a joke. Bless you. It was always delivered with affection, but it grated. I'm a quiet guy, an architecture student who prefers detailed drafting to loud parties. Daniel, from what I gathered, was the opposite. The life of every gathering, charismatic and outspoken. The first time I met him in person was a disaster. Sophia had a birthday gathering at a pub. Daniel was already there, holding court at a large table. He shook my hand with a firm, overly long grip, looked me up and down, and said, "So you're the famous Lucas. Sophia's made you sound very dedicated. All work and no play." The table of his friends chuckled. Throughout the night, he dominated the conversation, steering it towards inside jokes and stories from their hometown that I couldn't possibly contribute to. Whenever I tried to speak, he'd listen with a patronizing smile, then dismiss my point with a witty, cutting remark. Sophia spent the evening basking in his attention, laughing loudly at his jokes, including the ones made at my expense. When I brought it up later, she was apologetic. "That's just Daniel," she sighed, hugging me. "He's protective. He doesn't mean anything by it. He'll warm up to you." I wanted to believe her. The problem was, he didn't warm up. The comments became more direct, especially when we were all in a group chat with some of their mutual friends. He'd mock my carefully crafted architectural models. "Looks like a fancy shoe box, mate." Make fun of my methodical way of speaking. Give us the abbreviated version, "Lucas, we haven't got all day." And once made a particularly nasty comment about the quiet, rural region I grew up in, calling it the place where ambition goes to die. Sophia's defense became weaker. She'd sometimes tell him to stop, but it was always followed by a laughing emoji or a, "but you're not entirely wrong." More often, she'd just stay silent. I felt myself shrinking in these digital spaces, opting out of conversations to avoid being a target. The real crisis began when Sophia asked me to meet her grandparents. She was exceptionally close to them. They had essentially raised her while her parents worked abroad. This was a huge deal. We planned the trip for a weekend in late autumn. I was nervous but excited. This felt like a significant step forward, a sign that she was serious about us. The drive to their quaint cottage in the countryside was beautiful. Sophia was chatty and affectionate, holding my hand the whole way. "They're going to love you," she kept saying. "Just be yourself." I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would solidify things, and Daniel would naturally recede into the background of her past. Her grandmother, Evelyn, opened the door. She was a petite woman with sharp, kind eyes. She pulled me into a warm hug immediately. "Daniel, my dear, we've heard so much about you. Come in, you must be freezing." The world tilted. I stiffened in her embrace. Sophia, behind me, let out a light, tinkling laugh. Grandma, no. This is Lucas, remember? I told you about Lucas. Evelyn pulled back, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She looked at me, then at Sophia. But you said you were bringing Daniel this weekend. You've been talking about him visiting for ages. Her voice was firm, clear, with no trace of senility. Sophia's laugh turned slightly forced. Memories going, Grandma. I definitely said Lucas. Come on, let's get inside. The evening that followed was one of the most awkward of my life. Her grandfather, Arthur, a stern but gentle man, also called me Daniel repeatedly. Daniel, pass the potatoes, would you? So, Daniel, Sophia tells me you're quite the sailor. Still have that little dinghy? Each time, Sophia would correct her with a patient. Grandpa, it's Lucas. The corrections didn't stick. They'd look at her, then at me, with profound puzzlement. It wasn't a vague confusion of forgetfulness. It was a sharp confusion of conflicting information. They had clearly been prepared to meet Daniel extensively. I tried to play along, to be gracious. I answered their questions about sailing by talking about my interest in architectural structures near water. They listened politely but were visibly disappointed. The conversation kept circling back to Daniel, his job, his family, his recent achievements. Sophia enthusiastically participated in these topics, lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I felt like a ghost, an imposter occupying a chair reserved for someone else. After dinner, while Sophia helped her grandmother with the dishes, I sat in the living room with Arthur. He peered at me over his glasses. You're not what I expected, son, he said, not unkindly. Sophia always described Daniel as larger than life. You seem more of a thinker. I just nodded, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Later, as we prepared for bed in the small, floor-wallpapered guest room, I finally broke the tense silence. Sophia, why did your grandparents think Daniel was coming? They weren't just forgetful. They were expecting him. Specifically, she was brushing her hair at the dresser and slammed the brush down. For God's sake, Lucas, they're in their 80s. They get confused. Why do you have to make everything about your insecurity with Daniel? I'm not making it about that. I said, keeping my voice low. I'm asking a logical question. They knew details about him. They thought I was him. Did you tell them you were bringing him? She whirled around, her eyes flashing. Maybe I mentioned he might visit sometime. It's not a crime. They love him. He's like family. You wouldn't understand because you don't have friendships like that. This had become her mantra. You wouldn't understand. I understand friendship, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I don't understand why you wouldn't just tell me. Hey, my grandparents were hoping to see Daniel too. Would you mind if he joined? I would have minded, honestly, but we could have talked about it. This lying by omission, this chaos, it's disrespectful. It's not a lie. You're being paranoid and sensitive, she hissed. Just drop it. You're ruining the weekend. We slept back to back, a canyon of resentment between us in the small bed. I woke up early, my mind racing. I needed air. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to make tea. The house was silent. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I heard hushed voices from the sunroom. Sophia and her grandmother. But you promised you'd sort out with Daniel. Evelyn was saying, her voice low but urgent. You said this situation with Lucas was temporary, that you were seeing sense. Grandma! Please, not now, Sophia whispered back, a pleading tone in her voice I'd never heard before. It's complicated. Complicated? Arthur and I have been listening to you talk about Daniel for years. He's the one you belong with. This other boy seems nice, but he's a placeholder. You told us it yourself last summer. The kettle clicked off. The sound was like a gunshot in my head. A placeholder. The word echoed, hollowing me out. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the steaming kettle forgotten. I heard Sophia sigh, a sound of exhaustion and defeat. I know what I said. Things are just messy. Daniel has been telling me to end it for months. He says I'm settling. And he's right, Evelyn replied, her voice firm. Don't let this drag on, my love. It's not fair to anyone. I didn't wait to hear more. I walked silently back upstairs, got dressed, and packed my bag. Sophia came up as I was zipping it closed. Her face was pale. What are you doing? She asked, her voice small. We're leaving, I said, my tone flat. Now. The drive back to the city was spent in a silence, so thick it was suffocating. She cried softly for the first hour, then lapsed into a stony, angry quiet. When we finally pulled up outside our apartment building, we didn't live together, but she spent most nights at my place. She didn't get out. Are you going to talk to me? She demanded. You told your grandparents I was a placeholder. I stated, staring straight ahead through the windshield. You led them to believe Daniel was your boyfriend. You've been letting him campaign against me for months. What is there to talk about, Sophia? You've made your loyalties and your future perfectly clear. It's not like that, she cried, the tears starting again. Daniel is he's passionate. He wants what's best for me. He thinks you're holding me back. And what do you think? I asked, finally turning to look at her. Her face was streaked with mascara, her eyes desperate. In that moment, I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a stranger, a puppet whose strings were being pulled from a childhood she refused to outgrow. I think, I'm confused, she sobbed. I care about you so much, Lucas. But Daniel knows me better than anyone, he says. I don't care what he says. I exploded, the calm finally shattering. I care what you say. I care what you think. But you don't seem to have an opinion that isn't filtered through him. You lied to your family about me. You let them humiliate me. You let him humiliate me constantly. And you're sitting here, still quoting him to me. She stared at me, shock wiping away the tears for a second. Then her expression hardened. You're just jealous. You're jealous of a bond you can't possibly comprehend. You're right. Maybe I don't know what I think, but I know Daniel has always been there for me. And right now he's the one making sense. That was the final nail. The admission that her childhood friend's opinion held more weight than her own feelings or mine. Then go to him, I said, my voice cold and final. Get out of my car, Sophia. We're done. For a second, she didn't move. Then a shocking, raw anger twisted her features. Fine. You're just as weak as he said you were. And then her hand flew out. The slap caught me squarely across the cheek, sharp and stinging. It wasn't a hard hit, but the betrayal behind it was seismic. We both sat in stunned silence for a heartbeat, her eyes widened in horror at what she'd done. I simply reached across her and pushed open the passenger door. Get out! She stumbled out of the car, her bag clutched to her chest. I didn't wait to see where she went. I drove to a nearby car park, my hand shaking on the wheel, my cheek burning. The numbness setting quickly, a protective cocoon against a storm of hurt and rage. Over the next few days, the fallout was brutal. True to form, Sophia launched a preemptive strike on our shared social circle. I received a flurry of concerned and accusatory messages. Dude, Sophia said you had a meltdown at her grandparents and broke up with her over nothing? She said you're being controlling and abusive. Is that true? What happened? She's a mess. I was too exhausted for elaborate explanations. To my closest friends, I sent a brief, factual summary. She had been emotionally entangled with Daniel, lied to her family about our relationship, and her lifelong friend had been actively undermining us for months. I mentioned the slap only to my best friend, David. The rest, I let people infer. The reaction was surprisingly swift. Many of our mutual friends, it turned out, had always felt the dynamic between Sophia, Daniel, and me was off. They'd seen his dismissive comments in the group chats. Notice how Sophia would defer to him. Her smear campaign backfired spectacularly. People saw it as the desperate, manipulative tactic it was. Most apologized for doubting me. A few, who were close to Daniel, took her side and faded from my life. It was a clean, if painful, cut. A week after the split, I had to return a textbook to Sophia. We agreed to meet at a public cafe, a neutral ground. She arrived looking drained, her usual vibrancy dimmed. Daniel was not with her. She slid the book across the table. "I'm sorry about the slap," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "It's not the slap, Sophia," I said. "It was everything that led to it. The constant disrespect, the lies, letting someone else dictate the terms of our relationship. I've asked Daniel to give me some space," she said, twisting a napkin in her hands. I see now how toxic it was, how much I let him influence me. She looked up, her eyes pleading. "I miss you, Lucas. It was a terrible mistake. Can we please just try again? I'll cut him out completely. I'll fix things with my grandparents." The old Lucas, the one who loved her, might have wavered, but that man had been dismantled piece by piece over the past year. I felt nothing but a profound weariness. "No," I said, the words simple and absolute. "The trust is gone. You didn't just hide his influence. You actively collaborated in it. You made me the outsider in my own relationship. There's no coming back from that." The pleading in her eyes shifted into something darker, more resentful. "You're making a mistake. You'll never find someone who understands you like I did. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who needs committee to decide if I'm good enough." I replied, standing up, "Goodbye, Sophia." I walked out of the cafe into the crisp autumn air. The sting on my cheek was long gone, but the lesson was etched deep. For months, I had poured my energy into a relationship where I was constantly auditioning, constantly being compared to a ghost. The relief of being free from that competition was overwhelming. I threw myself into my final architecture project, a design for a community library. The piece of the drafting table, where the only voice was my own creativity, was therapeutic. David and other friends made sure I wasn't alone, dragging me to movies, games nights, and weekend hikes. I started seeing a counselor to untangle the knots of self-doubt the relationship had created. About a month later, I heard through the grapevine that Sophia and Daniel had tried to give a relationship a shot. It had apparently exploded within weeks in a dramatic, messy spectacle of jealousy and recrimination. Turns out, being the center of someone's universe is a heavy burden when you're also the puppet master. They were no longer speaking. I felt no schadenfreude, only a distant pity. They were both prisoners of a fantasy they'd built for years, a fantasy that couldn't survive the pressures of real intimacy. The final chapter of the saga came at the university's end-of-year exhibition. My library model was selected for display. As I stood by my work, explaining the concepts of light and communal space to a professor, I saw her across the room. Sophia was alone, looking at a painting. She glanced over. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. There was no anger, no longing, just a quiet acknowledgement of two parallel lines that had diverged for good. In that moment, surrounded by the tangible product of my own mind and effort, I felt a solid sense of self I hadn't known in years. The noise was gone. The constant criticism was gone. The ghost of Daniel had been exorcised. The path ahead was mine alone to draft. I took a deep breath, smiled at the professor, and continued talking about my design, my voice steady in my own.